Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Our guest today is Jethro Toro, host of the Bitcoin Country podcast. Jethro, how's it going, man?
It's going great, Vance. Thank you for having me. I've been listening to your show for a couple of years now, including about 15 episodes with Bitcoiners in El Salvador. So it's an honor to join the Pantheon now. I'm friends with most of those guys. It was great to meet you. Yeah, well, I love the show. It's, 300, 400 episodes, a lot of great content. And it was great having you on the Bitcoin Country podcast as well when you came to El Salvador for your first visit a few months ago. So lots of great stuff to talk about. Excited to get into it. Discussing the most inspiring country on earth.
El Salvador.
Yeah, lots to love. Renaissance 2.0, the new land of liberty, the shining city on a hill, the Silicon Valley of freedom tech. A lot of fascinating stuff going on there.
The shining city on a hill. That's San Salvador?
Well, it's actually a reference to a Ronald Reagan quote just about leading by example, setting a good example for the world as a place for freedom, for economic liberty, where people can build. It used to reference the American dream, but we're really seeing the Salvadoran dream become the new aspiration for many of the best and brightest from around the world. We see people from America, Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, entrepreneurs who feel like they can't build to their full potential. There are so many roadblocks in their home countries, maybe some policies like COVID or woke or whatever that they feel like was holding them back there. And El Salvador is actively trying to attract the best and brightest in so many different fields, especially technology, Bitcoin, AI. So it's a fascinating place. The reverse brain drain, as some call it, like Will Lair when he came on your podcast. So I'm excited to get into all of that.
Yeah, I think it's having a moment, El Salvador, and it's special to be a part of for you, I'm sure, because it's one of those like moments in time, like kind of right place, right time sort of thing. You really feel the energy.
Yes, absolutely, and it's actually physical energy too. You can feel the volcanic energy in the soil when you swim in the water in the Pacific Ocean, but also there's the volcano coffee. It's one of the best coffee producing countries in the world. So there's all sorts of energy just off the charts in El Salvador.
Wow. Okay, so we're going to get into it. How about you introduce yourself a little bit, Jethro, kind of maybe how you got into all this, whatever you want to, the story you want to tell.
Sounds good. Yeah, I suppose the short version is I'm from the US, from Washington, D.C., and studied quantitative economics, mathematical statistics, worked in data analytics for a while. During the COVID craziness, I was still working that for a while. After the jab mandates, I decided I wanted to change. I was just kind of like many people who moved to El Salvador and to Latin America in general. I'm sure many of your listeners, the digital nomad types, looking for the sovereign stack, flag theory, all of that. I wanted to explore my options. And I had heard about El Salvador. I became a Bitcoiner in 2020, and I heard about El Salvador passing the Bitcoin legal tender law in 2021. And I heard about all the progress that occurred after that and thought, oh, this sounds like a fascinating place. And then in early 2023, there was the Silicon Valley bank run, which, one of the wealthiest banks in one of the wealthiest parts of the world's wealthiest economies had a run on the bank. And it's like, the fractional reserve banking system works until it doesn't. And so that was a moment when I realized we need to get this Bitcoin economy up and running, show people that there is a better alternative. And it's a fascinating experiment with El Salvador embracing Bitcoin. That just seemed like the place to be. So August 2023, I flew down. I was fortunate enough to have a scholarship to college, so I had zero debt, some savings, freedom. So I was able to just come down for a few months and just explore and see what would happen. So I went straight to Bitcoin Beach, El Zonte, sort of the mecca for Bitcoiners around the world, and stayed there for a couple months. Got my first surfing lessons, paid for meals in Bitcoin, paid for the surfing lessons in Bitcoin, made a lot of friends. And then I also heard about this new project up in Bitcoin Berlin, up in the mountains. And, the beach is amazing, but it's also a little bit hot. And I'm also kind of more of a mountain person at heart. And especially, I've taken more surfing lessons since then, but I wasn't that good at that point. So I decided to go check out Berlin, lived there for a few months, ended up co-founding a conference, Economy of Bitcoin. And we brought people from around the world, speakers from around the world, ended up selling out every hotel in Berlin and just doing what I could to draw more attention to what was happening there. So, my background's data analytics, kind of a nerd, but I've ended up getting into this whole communications side of things. I'd also, I guess Twitter is kind of a big part of the story too. I had built up a following of a couple thousand people speaking on Spaces a lot, and kind of accidentally built up a crazy network, like 1 degree of separation away from all these fascinating people, Elon Musk, some really big name politicians, is just all sort of by accident. But I realized, El Salvador is setting such a positive example, and I somewhat by accident built up this channel for showing what was happening to people in other countries. And so I decided to just try to amplify the signal of all the positive things in whatever way I could. And so that was when I first arrived. And then last October, I had taken some time off. I went back to the US for a little while, stacked more sats. And then since last October, we were organizing round 2 of that conference in Berlin. And I ended up interviewing Max and Stacy, Max Kaiser, the high priest of Bitcoin, Stacy Herbert, the director of the Bitcoin office in the AI agency of El Salvador. And they were the first 2 people to ever speak about Bitcoin on television. They are advisors to President Bukele, and they were organizing their own conference, Bitcoin Historico. So we decided to do a podcast episode to promote the different events, and that ended up leading to working with them directly. So I had a remote job at the time, but ended up just dropping that because it's a dream opportunity. When Max and Stacy put out the call, you answer the call. And I've been doing contract work with them ever since, just helping with media and events.
How's that been?
It has been the journey of a lifetime. I mean, it's total whirlwind, speaking at 11 ticketed events, plus all sorts of meetups, just highlighting what's going on in different ways. Bitcoin Historico was at the National Palace and the National Theater. I ended up being the MC of the National Theater stage. I had never done that before, but I had some public speaking experience in high school, just doing competitions. So that ended up being far more useful than I ever would have thought. And, one thing led to another. I was co-hosting Spaces with Max and Stacy and the Historico guests. That led to doing the MC work. And then at Bitcoin Historico, once my MC work was done on the National Theater stage, everybody went over to the Palace. And I ended up doing about a dozen mini interviews with all of these different headline speakers, including some really well-known people like Grant Cardone and Zuby. They both have over 1 million followers on X. And also people, some of the best and brightest in the Bitcoin space, Jimmy Song, Jeff Booth, Lawrence Lepard, Knut Svanholm, all sorts of interesting people. And again, just one thing led to another. And here we are, a few months later. I've done about 40 of those mini interviews. I've done several panel podcasts, probably 15 more spaces. And it's been an honor being able to talk to so many fascinating people, so many people I've been looking up to and listening to for so many years, and getting, highlighting their story, and in particular, how El Salvador plays into that, and just the overall trends that they see, just with so many macroeconomic and geopolitical paradigm shifts in the world, why they see what's happening in El Salvador is so important, why they travel from around the world to come to these events and to contribute in all of these different ways. So it's been a huge honor, talking to founders, fund managers, technologists, authors, policymakers, circular economy leaders. It's a fascinating variety, and I've been loving every minute of it.
And you've been working a little bit with Max Kaiser.
Yeah, mostly Stacy. I mean, they do everything together, but my main point of contact is Stacy. She is the official director of the Bitcoin office and the AI agency. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah. So
okay, I wanted to ask one thing, which is the orange shoes. Max's orange shoes. Who came up with that to make it like a signature thing?
That's a good question. I actually don't know. You'll have to ask Max at some point. Wink, wink, wink. But yeah, I mean, Max has an incredible innate sartorial sense. He worked on Wall Street for a decade, and when I first heard about him, I was thinking of him as just a macroeconomics guy. But I didn't really fully understand until I met him. He's really a poet and an artist at heart. He did stand-up comedy when he was younger. There's actually a clip of Jerry Seinfeld introducing Max doing stand-up comedy from back in the day. So, he's not just a macro guy. He's a comedian. He's an artist. He's a poet. He
Uh-huh.
is a true Renaissance man.
Damn.
So I
Is
wouldn't
that
be.
on YouTube? That clip?
It's definitely at least on X. I can send it to you afterwards.
Send me that
But
one. I want. uh, we got to do our due diligence.
yeah, well, and they've done so many incredible things. Stacy also worked on Hollywood for a while, and then they teamed up and started the Kaiser Report, where they were the first two people to ever talk about Bitcoin on international financial news back in December 2010, when it was just 23 cents per Bitcoin.
Mhm.
And Stacy was actually the one who found that story. They were mostly focused more on gold and silver at the time, but Max figured out very quickly, just the value proposition of Bitcoin. Oh, wow, this is guaranteed at some point to at least reach $100,000 per Bitcoin, just when you consider the total pool of money in the world and Bitcoin's fixed supply and just the value proposition of sound money compared to a debasing inflationary fiat currency. He called it very early on, all the way back in 2011. And then just last year, he was proven correct, as Bitcoin went not only to 100,000, but actually $126,000 per whole coin. So, it's been an honor being able to work directly and speak with these true visionaries, leaders, and especially now that they're advisors to President Bukele. They went from just talking about these things, educating millions of people, to now actually making a difference in the real world on a policy level as well.
Cool. So you're advising them, and then they're advising Bukele.
I don't advise them. I mean, I like with events, I may help with little details like, oh, this would be a good title name for that particular talk. I help host panels and co-host spaces, but no, they're brilliant. They don't actually need my advice. I'm basically a media and events sort of Swiss Army knife. I help in any ways that they're too busy to. They do all the real work.
I know I'm messing with you. You're the one pulling the string anyway. But no, that's funny. Dude, everybody forgets about the Silicon Valley Bank bankruptcy, and that was a pivotal moment for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I first heard about sound money actually all the way back in 2012 with Ron Paul and the Fed and his presidential campaign. I read that book, went down the Austrian economics rabbit hole reading, Friedrich Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, Murray Rothbard, and, those sort of authors, Henry Hazlitt, Economics in One Lesson. So I was studying all of these things, but I wasn't really convinced about Bitcoin at first. I just figured, oh, it's, internet funny money. It's programmable. They'll find a way to change the code or something. There's no way that this actually lasts. But then along comes 2020 was really the pivotal moment for me, when they locked down the economy, closed 40% of small businesses, print trillions of dollars. And of course, we saw the inflation kick in a couple of years later. And I immediately knew in April 2020 that, Bitcoin is still around. It hasn't died yet, and it can't possibly be worse than what they're doing to destroy even the world's strongest fiat currency. Just debasing it like that is not sustainable. And, the US, it is still the world's largest economy. It still has so many good things going for it. But at the same time, you see almost $40 trillion in debt, over $1 trillion worth of interest on that debt that they have to pay each year. And you see various other economic problems. And it's just not sustainable, the current system. So I see Bitcoin as the best alternative. I think it's good for El Salvador, good for the world. And the paradigm shift won't happen completely overnight. But I think it's very important for people to see what's happening in El Salvador, how it has benefited El Salvador's economy in so many ways. And not just the economy. When they made Bitcoin legal tender, it was still the most dangerous country in the world, the murder capital per capita of the world. And when they adopted Bitcoin, it gave people a reason to come visit. There are a lot of very adventurous Bitcoiners. I'm sure a lot of your audience, the digital nomad type, they appreciate Bitcoin because it's borderless, right? Like you can just store your 12 seed phrase words in your head and cross borders with your money. You don't have to worry about the complexities of bank accounts in new countries. So it's better as money, just in terms of its medium of exchange properties. But then there's also this whole sound money angle, building up this new alternative system, digital gold for the digital age.
Yeah, 100%. I was curious about one thing which I don't hear enough about, which is the developers. And I feel like you have to have the software developers in El Salvador for El Salvador to really be a hub with this stuff. What's going on that front? Are they doing like startup meetups and stuff like that?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on that front. And yeah, actually, just to finish the point, it's not just the tourism where Bitcoin benefited El Salvador. It was also people moving there and helping to spin up an education system.
Mm-hmm.
So there are three main Bitcoin educational initiatives now. The first one was Kubo Plus, which was specifically for training Bitcoin and Lightning developers. So they take the best and the brightest Salvadoran students. It's highly selective, roughly college age, sometimes younger for really exceptional students, sometimes early career, but roughly college age. And Max and Stacy know all of the best people in Bitcoin. So they bring in these top educators from around the world to train these students. Many of them have already gotten jobs working for Bitcoin companies. And we've also seen actually Bitcoin Core is the open source software of Bitcoin. And there's a core developer, John Attack, who moved to El Salvador a few years ago. He actually started the Bitcoin Developer House in Tamanique, just north of Surf City. It's kind of the main mountain town right above Surf City, 30 minutes from the beach, beautiful area. And so he actually set up a developer house there to incubate more development. And he also helps train the Kubo Plus students. And then they've also kind of filled in the lower levels, the earlier levels of education now as well. There's the What is Money program for all students starting at the age of 7, just learning about money from first principles. You know, what is it? Why is it important to an economy? Learning about financial sovereignty. After that, there's the Bitcoin diploma. And I mentioned earlier, a big part of my story, a key of why I was able to move to El Salvador in the first place, is that I had an academic scholarship to university, so I didn't have college debt. But we're seeing a lot of people in their 20s, even still into their 30s, just drowning in this college debt. And a lot of people have been forced to stick in jobs that they hate, you know, maybe take certain medications that they don't want to because they have to keep paying this debt. It's, you know, but they get trapped in that. And then you get the car debt, you get the mortgages, and you're trading your freedom in exchange for this. And so it's good to, you know, there can be cases where it's good, like a mortgage. There can be a good case for going into debt in certain cases, but you need to understand what you're trading when you take on debt. And the US just doesn't teach this in its educational system. But El Salvador is teaching kids about finance and economics and money from first principles from a young age.
Mm-hmm. They're definitely investing big time for the future generation. Like they're definitely thinking very long term.
Yeah, and they're being very smart about it too. And so it's, you know, they have the different levels of education there. And then they've also, starting a little, probably about a year and a half ago now, they also signed the AI law, started implementing AI in all of these different ways. El Salvador is the first country in the world to get NVIDIA B300 chips at a sovereign level. They made partnerships with Google. So they're implementing AI to, you know, streamline and cut costs and spread access for healthcare. They made a partnership with SpaceX, XAI at the time, to implement personalized tutors in all of the different public schools. So the country, despite being a small developing country, they've figured out that by embracing technology and especially with a sovereign approach, they've been able to punch above their weight and really leapfrog over many of the problems. You know, we've seen in many developing countries, you know, they skip over, for example, with telephones. Many developed countries had the whole landline phase, and then developing countries have just been able to skip over that straight to cell phones. And we're seeing that phenomenon play out in El Salvador as well.
Yeah, no, that's all great stuff. What about on like the startup kind of front? I didn't I hear Tether is investing pretty heavily in the country?
Yes, so Tether moved their headquarters there, and they're actually developing, it's the tallest skyscraper, at least in Central America, possibly all of Latin America, 70, 80 stories, something like that, in San Salvador. And actually, speaking of skyscrapers, there's also tax incentives for developing skyscrapers. There's so many smart moves on so many different fronts, and I can circle back to that. But yes, Tether is just one of many Bitcoin-related companies. There are actually over 100 registered Bitcoin companies in El Salvador, and also well over 1,000 companies that accept Bitcoin. Many of them actually spend Bitcoin with each other, especially in places like Berlin. So we're really seeing it seep into the economy in many different ways. And also many of these companies are hiring the talent that was trained in the Kubo Plus program. So it's building out that full ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's all super important. Like people need to be engineers, you know? Like I don't know if do you code yourself at all, or we got
Yeah,
to
so
get you coding.
so my first job after college was data analytics, actually
Okay.
data engineering. So it was analyzing all the different types of data that would come in for a software as a service product. So kind of orchestrating the data, the flows of the data pipeline from all of these asymmetrically nested NoSQL lists.
Yeah.
So yeah, Python, R, SQL, MongoDB, JavaScript, and then now
Oh
vibe coding.
baby. Oh baby. Yeah. And now Claude.
Yep. Yeah, and I've heard you talk about that some in your episodes. I know that software development has been part of your journey and part of your freedom being able to move and get remote jobs. And yeah, it's very empowering learning how to build things yourself.
Yeah, I feel like we haven't talked about it too much, but I've been going all day every day on Claude and just the different LLMs. So I'm kind of using all of them. Like I'm in the terminal. I'm in like a VS Code, or I'm in an IDE, as it's called. Uh, trying to explain this for the audience, but in a code editor, which is because what I'm there's like levels to this. This is kind of, we're digressing here, but there's some people that only use the AI like in the browser, and they're just interacting with the chat, and they don't realize that there's this whole more powerful way of using it if you can use the command line and
Yeah.
use a code editor.
Absolutely. And so I'm actually seeing this myself, even though I don't do data analytics much anymore now. It's mostly media and events. I've been doing a lot of video editing lately. I sent you a little sample of the supercut I've been working on, 40 different interviews in person. And I've found that by working with Claude Cowork, but then also the terminal, and also using Claude to, instead of running everything in the cloud, creating local scripts, it saves a lot of time between steps, because instead of every time I want to make an adjustment having to send it back to Claude's cloud computer, if it's just local code where it can just adjust a few lines and then I run those lines locally on my terminal, it produces the output much faster. So you can iterate more quickly, including across different projects that are similar. So in addition to editing my own interviews, I've also been producing clips from Bitcoin Historico last year. All of these world famous Bitcoin speakers, including billionaires like Ricardo Salinas, one of the wealthiest men in Latin America, Jimmy Song, Max Kaiser, all of these fascinating people. They have so many great lines, and Claude helps me sift through all of the transcript, helps me more quickly identify the great lines to clip. It helps me quickly implement some of the common patterns for how I want to style the clips. And it's incredible. It's a superpower if you embrace this technology. And we're seeing El Salvador teach its students how to do this. And we're seeing them make partnerships with a lot of the best AI companies as well. So in addition to Bitcoin Historico, I mentioned earlier, one thing led to another. So it was MC, co-hosting spaces, ended up being Max Kaiser's.
What is Historico? Sorry to interrupt. What is Bitcoin Historico?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Centro Historico is kind of like the Times Square of Latin America, or like what Times Square is to New York City, or the National Mall to Washington, D.C. It is the place where tourists flock to. It's got the National Palace. It's got a famous cathedral. It's got the National Library all around. I think it's the Gerardo Barrios Plaza.
Yeah,
and the national. Yeah, in San Salvador. The National Theater is nearby. A lot of great restaurants are nearby. So it is sort of a tourist hub in the historic district. The National Palace also used to be where the legislature was based. So now it's more of an events and tourism hub. And so Bitcoin Historico was the inaugural conference by the Bitcoin office, hosted there at the National Palace and National Theater. And then also the point I was building up to was in April, they also had the inaugural Solve AI Summit there. So speakers from companies like NVIDIA, Google, XAI, Dell. some of the biggest companies in the world who have made partnerships with El Salvador because they see El Salvador has the most forward-thinking approach, the best policy sandbox, the most welcoming for actually deploying their most cutting-edge technology. So I mentioned Dr. SV, it at least was the number one most popular app in El Salvador for instant access to free healthcare, even for Salvadorans in the most remote towns to be able to get care, quality care on their phones. So that was a partnership with Google.
That was a huge launch.
Yeah,
I remember that, Dr.
It's a game changer. Yeah. It's a game changer. It was the most popular app in El Salvador for a reason. And we're seeing, for example, the partnership with XAI as well, implementing tutors in every single public school. They're starting to roll that out now because, you want to make sure you get these things done properly. But companies, the biggest companies in the world, now see El Salvador is the place where they can actually deploy their most cutting edge technologies, their best real world applications. So it's not just theory. We see Europe, for example, has taken a very very hesitant approach to adopting technologies like AI. Mm-hmm. Even in the US, we've seen some hesitation lately about open source models and possibly cutting off access to these cutting edge models from China because they want to protect, Anthropic or OpenAI. They want to create a regulatory moat and slow things down with bureaucracy. But in El Salvador, it's the place to deploy, embracing the future in ways that actually benefit society. And so the Sauve AI Summit was also at the National Palace in Centro Historico, and that's where the name Bitcoin Historico comes from.
That's amazing that you were able to use that space. How was that organized?
The magic of Stacy and the Bitcoin office and her AI agency teams. They do a tremendous amount of work on so many different fronts. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I don't know how there are enough hours in a day to get as much done as they do. And especially doing things that have never been done before in other countries, rolling out all of these different education programs, making all these deals with world-leading companies, attracting many companies to El Salvador, helping to write the actual policies, the Bitcoin law, the AI law, the robotics law, these world-leading pieces of legislation. They're doing all of that, and they're organizing these events to then show the world, hey, this is what we've been doing for the past year. This is all the cool stuff we're implementing. And it's all in this beautiful setting, the National Palace, Centro Historico. And that's just scratching the surface. Like, they're also rolling out Bitcoin zones in all of these different parts of the country. They're training all of the teachers around the country now to actually implement these new education programs. It's absolutely extraordinary how much they get done.
And it sounds like it's going to be an annual thing now?
Yes. So the second edition of Bitcoin Historico this year is November 11th and 12th at the National Palace. And I mentioned earlier, a big part of my story was Bitcoin Month last year. The conference I co-organized, Economy of Bitcoin. We sold out every hotel in Berlin for the second year in a row. But that was actually just a side event for Bitcoin Historico. And there were a couple other events that year, and there are a few other events this year as well. So there's going to be a surf contest at La Cajita Kitchen in Bitcoin Beach. There's going to be a rodeo, because in addition to all the other ways that El Salvador is really just getting all the foundations right in such a big way for all of these different aspects of building up civilization, at the same time as many countries are neglecting these different things, whether it's education, infrastructure, security, economic liberty. El Salvador is doing all of these different things. And, Bitcoin and AI are supercharging that. And so regenerative agriculture is a big part of that. So that's why I mentioned the rodeo. It's kind of celebrating that whole side of things.
The rodeo.
And yeah. Oh, El Salvador used to be the cattle capital of Central America. And then there was the Civil War and then the gangs. And essentially for 40 years, all of this potential, all of these beautiful, hardworking people were held back from doing all of the things that they had been doing so well for so long. But now that it's safe to do these things again, they're bringing it back in a big way. So yeah, there's regenerative agriculture on the energy front. So food and energy sovereignty are both very important. When you came to that Build in El Salvador roundtable, that was what my talk was about. Yep. It's about how we're seeing these things become a little volatile in the world. Definitely more important than ever to have stable, sovereign sources of energy and food production. And so on the energy front, it's 70% renewable And El Salvador used to be a net importer of electricity from its neighboring countries. Now it's actually a net exporter, and they're also able to use the surplus for Bitcoin mining and for AI. It's actually a token export model, so compute to GDP. So they've built up the energy, especially with the geothermal, because El Salvador has one of the highest concentrations of volcanoes of any country in the world. So, and geothermal is a very stable, reliable source of clean energy. So that's a big one. That in recent years under President Bukele, they've also built more hydroelectric dams, implemented more solar, and that's all on top of the fossil fuel imports as well. So energy is huge. Regenerative agriculture. I know you've had Murph on your show, Aaron Murphy, Murph's Life. And I know you visited him as well. And he's really leading the way, showing what's possible in El Salvador with regenerative agriculture. You know, the soil is so nutrient rich, the water, pristine volcanic water, and it is so fertile. This is true for a lot of Latin America, where you can pretty much just, throw a seed in the ground and up will pop a plant, and you can grow all sorts of different fruits and vegetables. At Murph's Life, they have tens of thousands of fruit trees. He recently signed an agreement with the government where they're actually rolling out education programs, training other Salvadorans how to become more self-sufficient by producing strawberries. And they were growing, I believe it was corn, and it's much more profitable to grow strawberries. So they're actually there was a big theme in that episode, and it's something Murph says often, teaching people how to fish. The classic saying, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him to fish, feed him for a lifetime. Yep. So teaching others how to start their own micro businesses, more profitable businesses, and at the same time spreading regenerative agriculture throughout the country so that it can actually fulfill its potential. So we're seeing on all of these different fronts. And in Bitcoin month this November, we're seeing a lot of those different things being highlighted, mixed in with some fun, more casual events like the surf contest, because El Salvador does also have world-class surfing.
And there's going to be a rodeo?
Yeah. I can't say too many details yet, but yes, again, El Salvador used to be the cattle capital
Bitcoin
of Central
rodeo.
America. Pretty much. Yeah, it is being organized by a Bitcoiner. And he actually also is the same guy who runs the Bitcoin farmers market. I don't know if you were able to stop by that when you visited, because there's always so much to do.
In Club Cocal.
Yeah, exactly. They just celebrated the 3-year anniversary of the Bitcoin farmers market. And the same guy is also the one organizing the rodeo. So shout out to James. And we're also seeing them. I can't speak too much. There isn't too much that's publicly ready to disclose yet, but they are actively working on more regenerative ranching in the country as well. So,
yeah, there's no culture of doing rodeos in the small towns, I guess, anymore. I'd be curious. Like in a more
there definitely is some. There isn't as much as there used to be. We got
to ask the AI how many bull rings do they have in El Salvador?
Yeah, it is a good question.
¿Cuántos plazas de toros hay en El Salvador?
Yeah, I should especially know this since my nickname is Toro. But yeah, it is a good question. I know there are certain hotspots of cattle ranching already in the country. So, for example, James does most of his ranching in Sonsonate, just south of where you were at Murph's Life.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Berlin, actually, where I've spent the most time, is one of the main hotspots of ranching as well. And then also up in Chalatenango, which also has great coffee. So Berlin and Chalatenango both have the coffee, the ranching, and the Bitcoin, which is why they're two of my favorite spots.
Wow. That's all a man needs.
Yeah, the essentials. It's a developing country. You can get some luxuries in the city and also in Surf City as well. There are certain resorts in the beach towns. But one of the things I love about El Salvador is they just get the simple life right in so many ways. I've heard you talk about how, contrasting the US and Canada, where people are siloed in their suburbs and it's a lot less social. Whereas in Latin America in general, you have this asada culture. There are always things happening, and the communities are more walkable. And we don't have to get into faith too much, but like there's that element of the culture. There's more family values. they just get a lot of the
religious
basics
events,
right.
they're like celebrating saints and they have a little feria on the weekend. It's always good
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, the festivals are incredible. Like the ones in Berlin are the main ones where I've experienced the religious festivals, but it's a big party. It's one of the main events of the year. Christmas time is incredible. They love their fireworks in El Salvador, and especially now that it's safe, they're looking for any excuse to party. So there's that, and then also, they're if you're from the US or Canada, I'm sure you're accustomed to the party lifestyle as well. You can get that in El Salvador if that's what you're looking for too. Like there is El Tunco, that's kind of a famous beach party town, kind of comparable to say Cancun. Within the city, there are, different raves and clubs, and there are also these pop-up raves throughout the country as well. So, you can get, as we would say in Bitcoin, high time preference, more superficial fun, but there's also just the
Yeah.
simple
I mean,
things.
at least it's safe fun because it's a safe country.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You don't get any of the riots that you hear about at some concerts. And now that it is safe, actually, Shakira just a few months ago came to El Salvador. And I think she was originally booked for just 1 or 2 nights.
Mhm.
And so many people from the neighboring countries also wanted to come see Shakira in Central America. Hardly
Yeah.
ever happens. So they ended up extending it to five sold out shows, just with all these people flocking from the dangerous countries to come see Shakira.
Wow. Did that happen
Yeah,
already?
yeah, that was a few months ago.
Yeah, the shows already took place.
Yes, and they went very well, so I'm sure there will be more like that in the future. A few months before that, Guns N' Roses came down, again, sold out show. And El Salvador is also building a brand new stadium. I think it's the biggest in Central America, state of the art stadium.
Yeah.
So I think we're just seeing the start of these, world renowned musicians coming down and performing.
Yeah, I've been saying this on Twitter that this once they have this new stadium, man, and just like you said, that like big acts start coming down, and you know, they show clips, say from the El Salvador show. It's really going to help the profile.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see, both on the high level and also on the local level, there's a great music culture. There's cumbia, kind of the national music of El Salvador, very danceable.
Love it.
There are these pop-up raves. So you get all these different music styles. I was surprised coming down as an American just how popular 80s rock music is. Like you'll be walking around and you'll hear the Guns N' Roses or the Van Halen or whatever. And that's one of the reasons I love El Salvador is, it's very authentically Salvadoran, but there is also some of that familiar American feel. Because so many Salvadorans during the 40 years when it was dangerous, so many came up to the US. Many of them go back and forth all the time now. So there is a little bit of that familiar overlap as well. And so you're seeing that with music. With the music, you see it on both the sort of local level and then also the big events coming in. And then also sports. The new stadium is going to be huge for soccer or football. And that's also one of the reasons I love living in El Salvador is, in addition to being very walkable in these small towns like Berlin, there are also their pickup games of soccer just all the time. So I've played many, not only in Berlin, but also some beach soccer. I also went to a tournament up in La Laguna, Chalatenango. So it's a lot of fun. Great way to meet more of the locals and, actually develop more of a friendship. I'm not fluent in Spanish. I speak a little bit, but it's a good way. Football is a universal language, right? It's the world's game. So great way to integrate into the community, have fun, and a healthy lifestyle while doing it.
I highly recommend it. Just this past year, I started getting good at the keep ups with the football, and like before, I couldn't really do it. I'd be like lucky if I got 10, and I sort of dedicated some time to it and just kind of practice it pretty frequently, and now like I have it down. So at my ripe old age, I've learned how to do keep ups with the ball now.
Nice. And, the skill aspect of it is timeless. We just saw Messi, 39 years old, at the World Cup, arguably the best player at the World Cup, because as he got older, he lost a step in terms of speed, but he still had the skills, still had the vision. And for me, my number is generally between 10 and 15 for the keep ups, but I read the game well, so I can hold my own in these tournaments. Like in that tournament in La Laguna, we ended up making it, I think it was the semifinals out of like a dozen teams or something crazy. and we were subbing in and out. But even though I was far from the most skilled player, my plus minus in hockey terms was positive. The team scored more goals and conceded fewer when I was on the pitch, just because I was reading the game well, defending, making the right off ball runs, and seeing where people are making the runs and passing to them. So you don't have to be the most skilled player to hold your own, but it is a good way to stay healthy, and it is fairly timeless as you get older if you focus on the skills.
Nice, man. Maybe there'll be a game next time I'm in town. So speaking of, what do we have for the rest of 2026? Is there going to be a Berlin event as well? What do people have to look forward to for the rest of the year?
Yeah, so the big thing is Bitcoin month, November. So the cornerstone of that cornerstone event of that is, again, Bitcoin Historico, November 11th and 12th. Okay. There is the surf contest around that. There is an AI event. I don't know how many details I can say publicly yet, but it's some really big players in AI coming down. I think that's November 18th and 19th. The 19th and 20th, there's a circular economy summit in Bitcoin Beach, El Zonte. We're thinking this year for the Berlin event, we'll probably do it as more of just a meetup instead of a conference right around that point. So I'll tentatively say maybe November 21st, something around then. But yeah, we're doing, anytime there's big events, like, the Bitcoin Historico, or there's Plan B in January. Actually, Tether is part of that. And so this past year for Plan B, we had a soccer tournament and the medium of exchange experience in Berlin right after that. And fun little story there. Saifedean Ammous, every Bitcoiner will recognize his name. He wrote The Bitcoin Standard. It's the best-selling book ever written about Bitcoin. And I was talking to him at Plan B, actually one of the interviews I'll be releasing soon on the Bitcoin Country podcast. And he was planning to fly straight home, but we told him about this soccer tournament that we were doing up in Berlin as part of the MOE experience. And he literally rescheduled his flight so that he could come to the soccer tournament in Berlin. So that was a ton of fun. We'll probably do something more similar to that rather than a full-fledged conference, just because there are so many other conferences this time. Mm-hmm. But there will definitely be some sort of event in Berlin. And yeah, there's also Bitcoin Historico is the main one. There's the AI event. There's the surf contest and the rodeo. The dates are not official yet, but probably somewhere in the middle there.
Okay, and so basically November is the big month.
November's the big one, and then the other big one is January. There's the Max and Stacy Golf Invitational. There's Plan B. Murph actually announced he's doing a regenerative homesteading summit. He was going to try to do it in November, but he's always building new structures at Murph's Life, and he decided to push back the summit till I think it's going to be January when some of the structures are done. But yeah, both of those months are going to be absolutely packed, and it's also the dry season in El Salvador. It's the best time of year to come down because it's getting cold, especially like if you're in the US or Canada. It's getting cold and dreary up there, but the rainy season is done in El Salvador. So November, December, January, those are the very, very best times to visit.
Agreed. Okay. And tell us about the Bitcoin Country podcast.
Yeah. So basically, my job is just to shine a spotlight on the best and brightest minds visiting and living in El Salvador, building this Renaissance 2.0. So I've had the honor of interviewing several dozen founders, fund managers, authors, technologists, policymakers, circular economy leaders, and more. It includes people with huge followings like Grant Cardone, like Zuby. It includes many of the biggest names in Bitcoin, like Saifedean Ammous, like Jeff Booth, Jimmy Song, Knut Svanholm, Lawrence Lepard, Max, Stacy, just all of these fascinating people. And so you get the full range of what's going on in Bitcoin country, why so many people are traveling from around the world to visit it. And so, yeah, basically it's mostly mini interviews, so roughly 5 to 15 minutes, but also mixing in some longer ones. Some are more like 20 or 30 minutes. Some are full podcast panels, so like an hour, I think even an hour and a half one time. And yeah, really just showing the full range of all of these different things that El Salvador is doing well and why all of these brilliant minds are coming from around the world to contribute.
Amazing. And we're going to link up everything in the description and the show notes to this episode. It's already on Spotify, I'm guessing.
Yes, it's already on all podcast platforms, and that includes the spaces I co-host with Max and Stacy. And by the time that this episode is released, it will also be live on YouTube. So we can link it there in the show notes. Maybe also co-release it now that YouTube has that feature. So hopefully people listening to this on YouTube can just click and subscribe right there. So make it nice and easy for them. And I also interviewed you when you came for your first visit to El Salvador. So I'll be releasing that. Maybe we can co-release that one as well. But yeah, all of that coming very soon.
Amazing. Any final words as we get to wrapping up?
Be the change you want to see in the world. The most effective votes are with your feet and with your wallet. So if you are unhappy with the way things are going in the US or Europe, reach out to Vance here. He can help you get your residency in El Salvador. Come visit for yourself. Don't trust verify, but I know people you've helped get their residency in El Salvador. And it's a small country. You get El Salvador at the price you deserve. The window where they're actively making it as easy as possible for the best and brightest, the people who want to build, that won't last forever. So now's the time. Go ahead and book your visit for November, especially November 11th and 12th, Bitcoin Historico. But I mean, you saw for yourself when you came to visit, there's so much to do. It really takes at least a week to get the experience properly. And even that's really just scratching the surface. Check out Bitcoin Beach, check out Berlin, check out Murph's Life, check out Lake Coatepeque, check out San Salvador, the historic district. There are so many great things to do. Try some of that Salvadoran coffee and yeah, just make the most of life. You don't have to stay stuck in fiat world. Life can be an adventure if you want it to be.
Amazing. Well, this has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Again, our guest, Jethro Toro, host of the Bitcoin Country podcast. And for the audience, please follow, subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, X, wherever you're listening to this, whatever podcast player. Leave a review. Really helps us grow the show. We'll see you in the next episode. Ciao for now.